Snow White's seven dwarfs aren't just cute sidekicks. They can be seen as reflections of our own inner world. That's right, Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey might each represent a different part of the human psyche. In this video, we'll take a fun deep dive into how these beloved characters from Snow White line up with big ideas in psychology. We'll use Carl Jung's Archetypes and a bit of Freudian theory as our map, but don't worry, we'll keep things casual and easy to follow. In the original Brothers Grimm fairy tale, 1812, the seven dwarfs were pretty mysterious. They didn't have individual names or distinct personalities. They were simply seven dwarfs who offered Snow White shelter in exchange for her housekeeping. It wasn't until Walt Disney's 1937 animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs that these little guys received their famous names and personalities. Disney turned them into lovable, quirky individuals, each with a unique trait. Some Jungian analysts interpret Snow White's time with the dwarfs as a journey into her unconscious mind. In the Grimm version, Snow White essentially hides in a safe limbo with the dwarfs, a grotesque and liminal space that symbolizes the unconscious. She's safe among these non-threatening little men, but she isn't growing or maturing. In Disney version, however, each dwarf comes to life as an individual character, allowing us to assign each one a symbolic psychological role, like different voices inside Snow White's head. Before we dive into those inner dwarfs, let's quickly explain our two psychological concepts in simple terms: Jungian archetypes and Freud's id, ego, and superego. Imagine a magic mirror that shows not your face, but the characters living in your psyche. Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud gave us ways to talk about these inner characters. Carl Jung believed that deep in our unconscious mind, we have universal archetypes. Think of archetypes as roles: the hero, the shadow, the child. Jung said fairy tales and myths are unconscious expressions of ourselves. In other words, these stories survive through time because they resonate with the archetypes in our own psyches. In Snow White, for example, we clearly see the innocent maiden, Snow White herself, the evil queen, the shadow or dark side, and even a prince, the hero. The seven dwarfs, as we'll explore, can also be seen as archetypal fragments of the psyche. Sigmund Freud, on the other hand, liked to break the personality into three battling parts. The id is our inner child or primal side. It wants instant gratification of desires, whether it's food, comfort, or getting the shiny thing now. The superego is like our strict internal parent or conscience, the rule-abiding part that says, you should or shouldn't do that. In the middle is the ego, like a calm, reasonable adult trying to keep the peace. It listens to the wild urges of the id, and also to the strict voice of the superego. The ego's job is to find a smart middle ground, to help us get what we want without getting into trouble or feeling bad about it later. Okay, now that we have our magic mirror frameworks, let's hold it up to each dwarf and see what we find. Doc, the rational leader. Let's start with Doc, the one with glasses who leads the group. He's the one who tries to keep things under control. He clearly takes charge. Doc represents the ego of the group. Think of Doc as that voice in your head that plans and reasons. For example, if you feel like staying in bed, but you also feel you should go to work, it's your inner Doc, the ego, that says, all right, let's compromise, get up, get coffee, you can nap later. In Jungian archetype terms, he might also have a touch of the wise old man archetype. He's got wisdom and authority. Grumpy, the shadow. Ah, Grumpy, that part of us that gets irritated, cynical, or angry for no clear reason. Grumpy is grouchy, suspicious of Snow White at first and always complaining. But interestingly, he also has a soft side. He cares deeply by the end, even crying when Snow White is in danger. Grumpy represents what Carl Jung would call the shadow archetype, the darker, crankier aspects of ourselves that we often try to hide or deny. Jung pointed out that in stories, the shadow often appears as a figure of the same sex as the hero. In Snow White's case, the evil queen is a shadow figure for Snow White. But on a deeper level, within Snow White's own mind, Grumpy is like a little shadow voice too. Freud might also see Grumpy as part of the id, raw emotion and impulse. Grumpy doesn't filter his feelings much. If he's annoyed, everyone knows it. According to Jung, integrating our shadow is important. Snow White's kindness eventually wins Grumpy over. Symbolically, this might mean that our conscious self, Snow White, needs to accept and love our own grumpy feelings to become whole. Happy, the joyful persona. On the flip side, we have happy, the always upbeat, laughing, round-bellied bundle of joy. Happy is constantly in a good mood, seeing the bright side of everything. In psychological terms, happy can represent our persona, the mask or face we show to the world. Many of us try to present as happy, even when we might not feel 100% so inside. Now, in Jungian theory, the persona isn't the true self. It's a role we play socially. Happy as a dwarf is somewhat one-dimensional. He's cheerful no matter what. This is like wearing a constant smile. It's pleasant, but is it authentic? Sleepy, the unconscious. Sleepy is the dwarf who is always drowsy, struggling to keep his eyes open. Symbolically, sleepy represents our need for rest and the pull of the unconscious mind. Psychologically, you can think of sleepy as the part of you that says, I'm exhausted, I need to stop and shut down for a while. Sleepy also connects to the unconscious realm of dreams. When we sleep, our conscious ego, like Snow White herself, takes a backseat, and the unconscious can come out to play in dreams and symbols. In the fairy tale, Snow White's period of unconsciousness, the poisoned sleep, is when transformation happens. With Sleepy around, we're reminded that sometimes our psyche needs to go dark for a bit to process things. From a Freudian view, one might say Sleepy could be a defense mechanism, like avoidance or repression. When things are too much, you just tune out. Remember, the dwarfs all work in a mine. Sleepy easily drifts back toward that inner cave of the mind, the unconscious. Bashful, the shy self. Bashful is the adorable, blushing dwarf who can hardly get a word out, especially when Snow White is around. He's polite, easily embarrassed, and often hides his face behind his beard or hands. Bashful represents our socially anxious, shy, and modest side, the part that worries about how others perceive us. In Freudian terms, Bashful aligns well with the superego, our internalized social conscience. On some level, our superego is reminding us of social rules or expectations. From a Jungian perspective, Bashful could represent the anima and animus dynamic in a sweet way. He represents a gentle suitor aspect, almost like the innocent romantic in the Psyche. For Snow White, a female figure, the animist is the male aspect of her psyche. Sneezy, the sensitive self. Hail, here comes Sneezy, constantly battling an allergy or a tickle in his nose. Sneezy represents the involuntary, instinctual reactions of our body and mind, the things we can't easily control. In real life, think of reflexes and impulses, a sneeze, a hiccup, laughing at an inappropriate moment. Sometimes our body speaks before our conscious mind catches up. Freud might place Sneezy in the realm of the id, or even the unconscious physical side of the id. While Sneezy isn't exactly a drive, it is an unconscious reflex. It's like how the id doesn't ask permission, it just acts on impulse. Sneezy's body decides to sneeze, and he can't stop it. Just like how the id might cry, laugh, or yawn without the ego's approval. Dopey, the innocent inner child. The lovable, goofy, mute dwarf with big ears and an even bigger heart. Dopey is childlike in every way. He doesn't speak, perhaps because he hasn't learned yet. He's playful and a bit clumsy. Dopey embodies the inner child archetype in its purest form. Jung noted that the child archetype represents innocence, new beginnings, and the future. He doesn't seem to understand danger or complex emotions, but he understands love and fun. From a Freudian perspective, Dopey is 100% the id. He lives by the pleasure principle. If there's good food, he'll try to grab an extra bite. If there's music, he has to dance. If he's scared, he dives under the bed. No ego or superego, much like a young child. In a more metaphorical sense, Dopey's silence might indicate that the inner child doesn't speak in words but in feelings. We've assigned each dwarf a role, but the magic really happens when you see them as a group. Together, the Seven Dwarfs create a kind of balanced mini-psychology. Think about a typical day in your life. You might start off feeling like sleepy, morning grogginess, then become duck to get yourself organized for work. You could feel happy when something good happens, get a bit grumpy in traffic, feel bashful in a meeting, experience a sneezy moment with an allergy or sudden laughter attack, and later let out your inner dopey goofiness with friends or kids. All these parts coexist within us. The key, as Snow White unconsciously shows, is letting each one have its moment while also working together. Mirror, mirror on the wall, the seven dwarfs live inside us all. And understanding them a little better might just help us live happily ever after, at least on the inside. If you enjoyed this journey into the psyche of the seven dwarfs, make sure to subscribe for more insights on how fairy tales and psychology connect to our daily lives.